welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming, and brilliant to have this completely full. I put up the tickets and then they just have gone, and everyone's like emailing me privately going, please can I get in? So that's obviously the Owen Jones effect. Just for those of you that haven't been coming to these are monthly lectures that were organised after the campaign we had, the independent campaign, Pitching Fiddle for Green. Partly because we wanted to continue to see each other. We just had such a good time with that campaign, and there's so much love and solidarity between so many of us, and I know many people left the Labour Party as well because of what happened. And it's partly because I'm just really grateful and wanted to invite some of the incredible people I know here to give these lectures locally or these discussions locally, and for us to get together and see each other. And more, I think that actually that's the fundamental thing, that we're trying to build community and getting together, speaking about ideas, talking to each other, meeting new people, is actually the bedrock, the change. I always thought it was ideas, and I've spent most of my life working on ideas, and those are important, but actually realise more and more through campaigning that it is the bonds that you have with people and the solidarity that you show that can carry change, and really helps to fight the despair. I know many of us feel for various reasons. But also these lectures are an opportunity for us to lean into some of the problems of the world. And I know there are so many, and it feels like we just want to switch off sometimes, but I hope that these are an opportunity to understand issues at a deeper level, discuss, and walk away and maybe feel a little bit more optimistic about the world, or at least know where to look if you need to find a bit of hope. So lucky to have Owen with us today, and there's so many things that we could talk about. I don't think he needs any introduction. I was lucky to meet Owen, I think maybe it's been like 10 years now. And he's not here, so I'm going to say this. It was embarrassing because I was doing this show and my husband was like, oh, can I come? And I was like, yeah, you can come. And he's like, is Owen Jones going to be there? And I was like, yeah, he's going to be in the green room. And he was like, oh my God. And he dressed up, and he was like, and at one point I walked past the green room and I saw him literally cornering Harry. Anyway. And luckily, he didn't hold that against me or him. We've got loads to talk about, and we've started a bit late, so I'm just going to kick off. But the way this is going to work is that we'll have about 40 minutes with Owen and I in conversation, and then we're going to open up for questions, Q&A, and actually it'll be a little interim where I'll just get you to talk to each other for 5 minutes, just to get your juices flowing. Before I forget, I just want to say, for a note for your diary, on December 16th, we're going to have a Christmas social here, and there will be a surprise guest, and I can't say who it is. Ooh. So you should definitely come to that. That's going to be more of a party, and a little bit of someone talking about what we should account for next year. Okay, so, sorry, I'm just going to find my questions now. All right, starting with, I think, in terms of the topic, we thought about doing this thing on what next for progressive politics. I think when I use that term, I mean it broadly to define what I see as progressive politics. That might be different for different people. I think it's so easy to define what it's not. It's definitely not cutting benefits for people that are disabled. It's definitely not making deals with BlackRock. It's definitely not selling arms to Israel. But do you want to start, Owen, by telling us what you think we should be aiming for in terms of what progressive politics should look like?
Go on then, but I've got to embarrass you first, I'm afraid. Those are the rules. It's such an honour to be with Faiza Shaheen. He was, of course, should be the rightful MP for Chingford and Woodford. But that said, I know, there's this claim it was a factional purge, and Labour said it was about quality control, and I know superficially you think Faiza's the perfect candidate, a working class woman of colour who rooted in her community, who loved her community, this loyal following, who became an incredibly talented economist, incredible communicator, but is she a slum landlord? or an apologist for genocide. And those are, I'm afraid, prerequisites for becoming Labour MPs these days. So that's a shame. Maybe become a property developer and rent out 20 homes which are covered in mould. And then maybe you'll become a Labour MP. Anyway, progressive politics. I think the broad definition for me of progressive politics is that there are collective problems that need collective solutions. That injustice isn't about individual failings, it's about a system that's rigged in favour of a tiny few. And we want to redistribute wealth and power, to coin a phrase, to make it for the many, not the few. And I think that's the broad brush definition, because in that you can have people who are more radical or transformative than others, but that would be the general direction of travel. So that definitely does not mean, for example, handing loads of taxpayers' money to BlackRock and privatising even further the nation in which we live, which is public money is a cash cow for private profiteers. We've seen that with the private finance initiative. We've seen that, of course, with how our basic utilities, which satisfy our basic needs, like water and energy, became, again, cash cows for profiteers. You put profit before people's needs. So I think that's why we believe in collective struggle. We don't believe that the way we get social change is through the goodwill and generosity of the powerful, that they didn't wake up one day and think, oh, I'm going to give women the vote for a laugh. People had to struggle, and they had to be annoying, and often were vilified, demonised in their time. And then later on, of course, history often treats them as courageous heroes, and how could anybody oppose the suffragettes when, of course, at the time, they were demonised generally as hate figures. So I think, collective struggle, a recognition that we want to redistribute wealth and power to create a society that puts people's needs before everything else. And that means, of course, the planet as well, because there is no future for our humanity which can prosper and fulfill its potential on a dead planet, clearly. So, I think that's how what would you say?
I'm going to be here all day. No, I absolutely agree. But I would also say, during these years of campaigning, it's not just what we're aiming for, it's how we do it. And I think so much of what's left out is the importance of grassroots organising, of building community, of going out to our local schools and speaking and, doing it in a way that involves people, that isn't top down, and that feels genuinely like we are not just listening, but that people themselves are empowered in bringing about that change. Obviously, you've been fighting on the left for a long time, and there's been a lot of highs and lows for us in that time. Where do you think we are right now? Is this a high or a low?
It's a mixed bag. We're taking the scenic route to socialism, sure. It is actually a mixed bag, though. I think we should be very clear about that, because if we think back years ago, I remember when I started, my first book came out in 2011, and I was like the token lefty who looked a bit like Macaulay Culkin in Home Alone. And since then, you've seen so many, particularly people who are genuinely young, other than geriatric millennials, people who actually have come up, Gen Z, terrifying, people who've come up through struggle, people, who are bursting full of ideas. And if we look at where we're at, sure, the Labour Party, through duplicity and deceit, the leader of the Labour Party, he conned the membership. There's no point pretending he did. It's not like Tony Blair, whatever I think about Tony Blair and the war crimes committed in Iraq, for example, but whatever I think about Tony Blair, he didn't stand in 1994 for leader of the Labour Party and pretend to be a more competent version of Tony Blair. Did he? No, he didn't. He made clear the direction of travel. He didn't say we're going to nationalise utilities. He didn't say we're going to abolish tuition fees, although to be fair, they were introduced properly, I suppose, under the Labour government. But I mean, he didn't say we were going to increase taxes on the rich. He made clear the direction that he was heading towards. And Keir Starmer only could win because he knew where the centre of gravity of Labour members were. And if they knew he was going to shut down democracy in the Labour Party, purge people like Faiza, who he, by the way, many tweets lauding her quite correctly as a great candidate. If people knew that it was going to be a pie of, you know, where Peter Mandelson would be at the front and centre and people like Faiza kicked out and slum landlords, not to belabour a point, keep being selected as Labour MPs, you know, I think people would, or arming a genocide. Would people have signed up for that? No, they wouldn't. And the reason that's a positive is because it's not like when New Labour came to power, when in lots of ways the left was defeated, whether we like it or not, it was the period of the time. They were defeated politically and intellectually. The left was on the back foot. The left was defensive, you know, and ended up defined more by what we were against than what we were for. Stop the cuts, stop privatisation, and so on. And I think what's positive now is we have lots of people like Faiza and, you know, a kind of left economists and intellectuals and thinkers who actually have thought very creatively about what a society would look like that isn't the neoliberal nightmare that we've got today. So I actually think we have something, we have ideas, we're bursting with ideas, I think. And I don't think that was true, certainly, even a few years ago. If we look now, even despite the routing within the Labour Party, in the last election, more left of Labour candidates were elected than have ever been elected in the history of British democracy. You know, whether that be through the Green Party or whether that be the independent candidates who were selected. I mean, since World War II, only 8 independent candidates have been successfully elected at a general election, in a competitive election. So it excludes where, you remember Martin Bell, he stood and won against Neil Hamilton, but Labour and Lib Dem stood down for him, so it doesn't count in the same way. It's not a competitive election. But anyway, there were 8, and 5 of them were elected at the last election. I mean, the fact, to be honest, you know, with Pfizer, given everything that was thrown at her, that is an astonishing result. Historically, that doesn't happen. Independent candidates, including who've been MPs for years, end up with 2,000 votes. It's very rare to get that kind of cut through. The reason for that is because those ideas have a big resonance in lots of communities in this country. And I think younger people are much more politicised than when I was a lad. When I was younger people were seen as very apathetic, very disengaged. You know, more interested in consumerism than anything else. And I'm not going to pretend the next generation are a bunch of just ideological committed socialists. You know, I wish that were true. But they are much more political. And, you know, whether it be movements like climate or BLM, or that general sense of an economy that's rigged against them, you've seen a kind of sensibility amongst lots of younger people, which is progressive in a way that I don't think existed before. In 1983, Thatcher won the youth vote. She won by 9 points over Labour. So it's not an automatic. And the Financial Times did research showing that millennials in Britain have moved to the left, the first generation that's happened ever recorded. So I think there's been a shift in a lot of society. And just finally on that, I think the point about how Keir Starmer won by deceit is, in a sense, you know, they ended up with everything in their favour, and they ended up winning 33.7% of the vote on the lowest adult turnout in the history of British democracy. And I know a win's a win. I know how our electoral system works, and that's their response. But you can argue they won the game in the electoral system, but that doesn't translate into enthusiasm, obviously, for what they stand for. There was no enthusiasm for what they stood for at all. They won by default with the best possible conditions, and they got a Jenga coalition, a Jenga tower coalition, because it's based on such tiny margins and so many seats. And so I just think, you know, New Labour was rooted in something at the time, and this isn't. It's not the zeitgeist. It's not where people are at. It was won by deceit, and even then, it didn't win this big mandate. And I think out there, but there's a big caution. There's a caution that we have to have is if we don't get our act together, the far right are going to, and we've just seen that in the United States. But it's not that brand of technocratic right-wing neoliberalism. That's not what is appealing to people, and we've just got to offer something more compelling, but we can.
Yeah, thank you, Owen. I think we did see a lot of despondency in this election, and it wasn't necessarily people just being like, I'm just not interested in politics. It was, there's no one for me to vote for. And what was interesting to me, and I know some people were in the house when this happened to me, I got a random phone call with a guy that runs a Chicopodium society that must have given my number back in 2018 or something, and he said, I'm just calling to say I'm glad you're running now because I was going to vote for reform, but now I can vote for you. Which, you know, blew my mind, but it happened a few times. I had conversations with people, and people that knocked here are also like nodding. It was actually like a vote to be a kind of up you to the system, and I was also seen as that. And so, you know, it was quite interesting to see that when you give an alternative that isn't from the right, but that does give people an option. I think a couple of things really came up and are redefining people's politics. And we should talk about class in a minute, but one area, and I know someone said this to me, it's like the Palestine issue has fundamentally changed their views on so many things. You have been absolutely fearless in speaking out about Palestine, and I'm sure many of us are really thankful to you because that comes a huge help. Yeah. I was just saying the other day, if they can go for Gary Lineker, then the rest of the rest of us, it's and yeah, I thank you, but I'm also interested in your last year of really speaking up, what you've learned about our political system, about the way the media is working, but also, I've been going to Palestine protests probably like yourself for many, many years. The movement has really grown. There's a lot of people that see the world differently because of this, and that is an opportunity for us to build.
Yeah, I'm not, very sweet of you, but in a sense, I'm not doing this to be self-deprecating, but I don't deserve the applause for it in that, there's no point having a platform at a time like this unless you stand against genocide facilitated and armed by your own government. And I prefer people to be not grateful for those, unfortunately, tragically few voices at the moment who still speak out in the midst of some of the most depraved atrocities committed in our age, but to be angry at those who remain silent, despite knowing full well what is happening with British weapons, including components in F-35 jets, currently raining death and mayhem on the people of Palestine. Those are the people we should be angry with. How dare they? The British media, look, I didn't have illusions of them. I've worked in the British media now for 13 years. And I already had, I'll be honest, contempt, which was often, I have to say, reciprocated. I didn't have illusions. I knew it was institutionally racist and full of people who are often defined by career climbing and a lack of any moral and ethical integrity. I knew that already. But it is still important to always be shocked, I think. It's always, never stop being shocked at the evil that is committed in this world, including in our name. And I still, every day, take a bit of time to say, I can't believe this is actually happening, but the fact that the British media so openly, so brazenly, essentially declares that Palestinian life has no real meaning or worth or value. And you have to ask yourself, what does it take? Literally, what does it take? How many slaughtered babies and children, burnt alive, shot, buried in rubble does it take? How many children, terrified children, and you can listen to their final words like 6-year-old Hind Rajab, in a car with her 4 cousins, her aunt, her uncle, massacred. You heard her 16-year-old cousin on the Palestine Red Cross responder, begging for help, begging for her life, shot dead on the call. Then you heard 6-year-old Hind Rajab, terrified, increasingly scared of the dark. An ambulance sent to her, an ambulance whose coordinates were given, and they were liaised and organised with the so-called Israeli Defence Forces. And then those paramedics arrived, immediately blown up, killed. And then 6-year-old Hind Rajab, desperately scared, on the phone. And then all of their bodies found a week later. A detailed report by Forensic Architecture based at Goldsmiths revealed in detail how it was literally impossible for the Israeli army not to have deliberately killed everyone in that car knowing who they were. Broad daylight, close up, over a period of time, fired around 250 bullets in different sporadic moments at a car full, clearly, of civilians, including 4 children. That incident is just one example of the atrocities which are being committed. The deliberate starvation of Gaza. And that's the other point. They didn't cover up what they've done. They couldn't have been more open or brazen. We don't have to look at top secret documents that are being leaked. They just went out and said at the beginning what they were going to do. They said, we are fighting human animals and we are going to starve you. We're going to cut all the basics of life. The general in charge of the civilian Major Ghassan Alian, he said on the 9th of October, he said we'll fight. He said Hamas have become ISIS. The civilians of Gaza are celebrating instead of taking them on. Human beasts are dealt with accordingly. We are cutting off everything, water and food. You will only get damage. You ask for hell, you will get hell. What do they need to say? What more do they need to say? No one can pretend he wasn't saying anything other than we're going to exact terrible retribution against the people of Gaza. And yet the media didn't frame any of their coverage around the explicit statements of intent. They just needed to report what was being said. That statement alone was barely covered in the Western media. And instead we had this discussion about, well, is it proportionate? You know, on the side we can agree to disagree, but it was actually Israel's self-defense. Mass starvation, Gaza's civilian infrastructure so destroyed and damaged that Gaza is a different colour and texture when looked at from space. The US 2 government agencies, including USAID and the State Department's Refugee Department, in April told Joe Biden's administration, who they serve, that Israel is deliberately starving the population of Gaza. But this is all in broad daylight. It is a crime more confessed to than any crime in history. With more information about the atrocities being committed than any other atrocity as it was happening, thanks to social media, thanks to the Palestinian journalists, the lions of the world's press pack who've been slaughtered in the biggest butchery of journalists in recorded history, often alongside their children. The Western media has facilitated this genocide. This genocide would not be possible without the Western media normalising, whitewashing, erasing, regurgitating Israeli propaganda, and what they do is they ignore the statements made by Israeli leaders and officials to their own people, and then treat as credible, over and over again, Israeli statements to Western audiences in a way they would never dream of doing to, say, Russian sources. They facilitated this and normalised it, and I think the way this has changed people is it's so depraved and extreme and so obvious that the Western media is not telling us the truth. We're not being told what's actually happening, but people can get access to what's happening. So they can see the massive gap that exists. They can see them being gaslit. They can see realities being turned on its head. And they can see that Western politicians who talk about human rights and a rules-based order have nothing but contempt for it unless it serves their interests. So they can see a world that is rigged in favour of these Western powers and elites which don't give a toss about human rights in any meaningful way and only use human rights when it's convenient. If that was if that was a state that was hostile to the West, no one would be debating whether this is genocide. And it would have been bombed by the West, by the way, a long time ago. Western newspapers would be full on the front of, this must end. It doesn't matter how, it must end immediately. The deafening cries, but instead most of the atrocities aren't even there, aren't even being covered. And I think people see, and I think the other thing, just finally, I think people see, and it's a really important point, because it's not just, obviously, British Muslims who care about the genocide being committed by our government, but the implication is clear to many British citizens that if Western governments don't care about the people being slaughtered in Palestine based on ethnicity, then that hierarchy doesn't just apply abroad, but it will clearly apply in this country as well. And people are being told whose lives have meaning and whose don't, everywhere. And that, I think, it changes how people see the world. But I think the moral authority of the West was always, obviously, not taken seriously, quite rightly, because of the crimes of empire, more recently Iraq and all the other crimes, but it's dead, it got buried in the rubble of Gaza. And the West will never recover from this. The West's moral authority is so destroyed. And I think people will never see the world again because they will never ever trust what Western states say. They will never trust the Western media again. And I think a whole generation is being raised to see the world in a completely different way. And I think it's for us to be clear that we tell the truth. We have moral consistency. We are the people who stand against all crimes committed, regardless of who they're committed against. But this, I think, for me, it certainly changed how I see things in that, you know, this is a red line, and every single person who facilitated this has to be held to account. People have to go to prison. People have to go to jail, and that includes our leaders, American leaders, and I would know, in the Rwandan genocide, journalists were held to account for what they did. And journalists need to be held to account in this country because they helped facilitate genocide. Thank you.
It's good, yeah. And you're holding on back, it's easier. Yeah, thank you for that, Owen. We were just at a dinner this week. Some of us here went to this dinner organised locally on Saturday night. They raised over 100 grand that night.
Amazing.
For a small charity that is working directly with paramedics in northern Gaza, and they had someone from Gaza live streamed and speaking, and it was just the level of humanity was insane. But one thing I told them, and that I keep telling everyone, and some of you that were here at the last amazing talk we had with Dave Waring, is that, you know, I was told when I pushed back about these things from David Lammy that the Muslim community will forget by the time they didn't, and by the time it will come for an election. And it's not just the Muslim community, like you said, right? And I think that people need to remember not just what happened in our complicity in terms of sending arms and supporting the US and abstaining from votes from the UN, etc. But also, the role of the media. And I think already there was quite a shift in what people were looking at anyway. It's amazing how much, these Palestinian photographers and journalists on the ground are followed and listened to more than the BBC, for instance. And that is, in essence, a good thing, and perhaps the beginning of something. Also, this is what happened now. Just was thinking, looking at tabs on my bookshelf I bought years ago, before you were famous, I have to say, and obviously the establishment as well, which really got into class politics, which sometimes gets a bit lost in our conversation, I think, now. But I'm just wondering, of course, people's eyes have been open to some extent from Palestine, but there have been shifts in terms of class politics. But what you see is actually large swathes of the working class in this country not voting at all, and historically the first time that Labour Party didn't get the largest share of their vote from the working class. And I just wanted you to reflect on that. We're going to come back and draw this together, I promise. But just thinking about where you started and looking at class politics, how you think that's evolved here, what that means. And then I know you're back from the US a week ago, so we're going to talk about that as well.
Yeah, just on, because when I first wrote Charles back in 2011, the kind of context at the time was, my understanding that there is no left without class politics. That has to be called to how we see the world, who's got wealth and power and who doesn't. And at the time, the kind of conversation was, we're all middle class now, wasn't it? Class doesn't exist. If you care about class, go back to the 60s, you big communist dinosaurs, that kind of discourse. But one thing I would say is what I warned, without going, I warned about this, and look what happened. But what I said in that book was, the danger was that a savvy right-wing populist movement would come along and adopt the rhetoric of class because a vacuum had been left, and they would try and refashion it to be a kind of talk about how a white working class is being swamped with immigration and multiculturalism is damaging its interests, and there's this progressive, do-gooder metropolitan elite which is unpatriotic and hates them and their values. And I do think that's what... Theresa May, do you remember the Citizens of Nowhere speech? And she spoke about it all the way through. She was talking about working class people, working class families, building a society and running the interests of working class people.
And it's done as like working people.
Exactly, and because it was interesting with that, because they, Margaret Thatcher said class is a communist concept. She said it puts people into bundles and sets them against each other. And in the 70s, the Conservatives released this document which said the problem in Britain isn't class, it's class feeling. I mean, they wanted to eradicate, they wanted people to think of themselves as individuals, they're atomised. There was no such thing as society. They're only individuals and their families, as Thatcher put it. It was the idea, we look after you and yourself, and those who are directly related to you. It's everyone for themselves. Because otherwise, class breeds a sense of collective strength, that you collectively organise based on having common shared interests with others, and you don't just have common shared interests which are different from those at the top. They're on a collision course, and that you need to use your collective strength to fight them. And the problem is, what you see, Starmer's done it to a large degree, as well as what UKIP and Farageism did, is, and the Brexit vote kind of tried to tap into that in terms of how it was spun, which was complicated, because most working class people under 35 voted to remain, and most middle class people over 65 voted to leave. There was a class coalition on both sides. It was complicated, but it was represented as the new working class politics was portrayed as reactionary, and the left was seen as those kind of metropolitan middle class do-gooders. And you saw that as well, the erasure of that you couldn't be young and working class. I mean, a lot of the descriptions of class in the media became, the only people who are working class would be, a socially conservative person, a man in their 50s who lives in an East Midlands town. And that's not to say that's not part of the working class, but it was as though a delivery rider in Birmingham isn't, who's 23 and in private rented accommodation isn't part of the working class, but that's never shown as part of the rich tapestry of the working class. The working class is obviously more diverse disproportionately than the rest of society as a whole, and more privileged sections of society. So I think, for me, class is now, it's different from when I wrote the book, because no one really says, there's no such thing as class anymore, but it got partly refashioned in a dangerous way. And it's important for the left to always reclaim that. It's to always root, I think, our politics in the idea of class, who has wealth and power and who doesn't, and how that intersects. It's really important, because, as the experience of a young working class black guy in Hackney is not exactly the same, clearly, as a working class white woman elsewhere. Gender, race, sexual orientation, that all matters, and that intersects as well with that. But there's, a form of identity politics which is stripped of class, which is a problem. And I think you need to integrate always class with all forms of struggle. But if we don't do it, then that's the danger. The right-wing populists are doing it, and that's why we've got to reclaim class always.
Just to say, if you want an example of this, and we should talk about the other side of the establishment, because it's also like the way the elites behave, is that if you look at the tweet that Keir Starmer did on BlackRock, and you look underneath, I went down such a rabbit hole, then clicking on people's profiles that had responded, and it was lots of the far right that actually have a very clear story about class.
What the hell? That tweet was crazy. Can we just say? Did people see the tweet?
People need to go and look.
Okay, it's really, really crazy. It looks like they got, those tweets where a company's paying someone to promote them. Do you know what I mean? It's like go and read it out. But it was basically like, I'm really committed to growth. That's why we today did an historic deal with BlackRock. It was so weird. But
if you look at the response, what's interesting is that it's like...
No, that's the thing. It's really interesting. Yeah, he said, I'm determined to deliver growth, create wealth, and put more money in people's pockets. This can only be achieved by working in partnership with leading businesses like BlackRock to capitalise on the UK's position as a world-leading hub for investment. There's got like him and Rachel Reason and BlackRock. It just is odd. But yeah, loads of right-wing accounts jumped on that immediately, and they were angry about it, and it became a bit. And so, kind of like, who's it appealing to?
Yeah.
Like, who's going? Way BlackRock.
Yeah, but it's not even just that. I think from a class politics perspective, I found it interesting and worrying, exactly for the reason you said, is that the far right have a very clear story about class. And yes, it's full of conspiracy theories and the rest of it.
Because they talk about big corporates around the world. I mean, they talk about
sold out, and you know, people were like, "You've sold out this country," da da da. And they're like, and then there's also like progressive left people replying as well. But the far right lines, they were getting way more traction.
100%, yeah.
And I think, you know, and this is the work that I'm going to be doing at London School of Economics, and we're going to have someone come and talk about this early next year. We have left the class politics open, wide open, and yeah, genuinely have a look at that tweet and like click on the profiles of the people that are getting the most likes, and it's just very alarming. We've got to find a way to reclaim class, like you say, and build that stronger kind of cross-class coalition, I would say, definitely. I mean, here in Chippenham for Green, you know, it's quite a middle-class area. Of course, there's lots of working-class people as well. And that coalition could be quite powerful, but we just don't do anything with it.
I'm not saying, in a way, what is the middle class? It's such a kind of amorphous label, isn't it? And it's often like, it's wrapped up in kind of aspirational politics, but what often portrayed as the middle classes have become a lot more precarious and insecure. I mean, a really good example is academia. I mean, the casualisation, the low pay. And I think, you know, whether people call themselves working class or middle class, is about these common shared interests and people coming under attack from the same people.
Yeah. I think for us, when we talk about progressive politics, though, it's really important because we've got to understand where we can build power. Kind of coming to the US now, I'd love to hear, give us like a sense of what it was like, because I know you went to some Trump rallies and stuff, but yeah, tell us a funny story. But also, yeah, like what did you see there, and what do you think are the similarities between there and here?
I did go to Trump rallies, which was my natural habitat. Yeah, I went to Wisconsin, and then to Michigan, to North Carolina, Pennsylvania. Yeah, I mean, it was alarm. I was alarmed. The Trump rallies were alarming. There was lots of energy and excitement, and you could see actually quite a broad range of people there. I mean, there were people you wouldn't, you know, the sorts of opinions being expressed were often what you would associate with just the open far right in this country, an EDL rally, you know, the Tommy Robinson rally, but there it was just the mainstream. I mean, they just won the election. I mean, it was a range of people, and that was odd because you'd get normie Americans, kind of the sorts of people who would live around here, and in this, you know, might be voting Labour around here, and they're voting for Donald Trump. There's no question about that. And you know, some, you know, I had like, you know, an ex-miner who was talking about the pain and the destruction of the mining industry in the sense of the loss that he felt, and that was in Pennsylvania. Yeah, and you could see that sense of loss and that loss of kind of esteem and how that is tapped into by the likes of Trump. And a lot of those were angry because, you know, the Democrats have held the presidency, unlike in this country where we're used to Tory domination, but they've actually dominated the presidency, certainly since 1992. It was George W. Bush and one term of Trump, but the rest with the Democrats. And, you know...
The popular vote.
Exactly. Oh, well, that's the point. I mean, this is only now the second time the Republicans have won the popular vote since 1992, because they didn't win it in 2000 under George Bush, and they didn't win it in 2016 under Donald Trump. But you also met people, I mean, some people are just like, yeah, I want Trump to be the dictator, I want him to be Putin, and how much they love Putin and want Trump to be him. You know, just overtly just talking, you know, very conspiratorial, you know, saying he'll stop World War III, and then you're like, and that was also alarming, actually. That was alarming. It was so many of them. Their big three things were migrants and kicking out migrants, and some of them were very vitriolic about that. Inflation, prices, squeezing wages, and war. And a lot of the time they sounded like peaceniks who just hated migrants. I mean, they would constantly, he'll stop war. And it was odd thinking about, because that was the party of George W. Bush. That was the neoconservative party in 2008, and he has partly rode the wave of anger at the fact that the US has done these catastrophic military adventures, which were disastrous and killed huge numbers of people. And it's pretty astonishing how he's managed to tap into that in a way that the Democrats have failed to do and became associated with war. Though, if I'm going to be honest, the Republicans are obviously awful, but the Democrats often have been more associated with war. They did the Vietnam War for a start. They were the ones who began US involvement there. And obviously, but there was the Republicans who did Iraq and Afghanistan.
Don't you think some of that is like the amount of money being spent?
100%, yeah. It wasn't like, they weren't going, those poor people, They were just like, this is a waste, and, and who's it going to, and all the rest of it. It's not like it's I'm not going to pretend it's
They care more about spending there than,
Why aren't we looking after our own more than people abroad? But I just, it was a combination of people who some of them, you've got to be clear, some of them are just racist and bigots, and they exist, and I'm not going to we shouldn't just disappear those people, but some of them are clearly people who are angry at a system rigged against them, because the US now has median wages, hourly wages in America, for many workers are the same as they were 50 years ago. I mean, it's an incredible squeeze in living standards. And when you suck optimism out of a society like that, it can go in very dark places. And the US is a power in decline. It's suffered military humiliation abroad. Its economy has not delivered rising living standards for a huge number of people. And it's been embroiled, its institutions, in crisis, which has made people angry and disillusioned. And the problem is, there was an alternative, Bernie Sanders, who actually won over some of the sorts of people who actually went on to vote for Donald Trump. And it's that point you made about people voting for you who said they're going to vote for reform. AOC did this as well. AOC outperformed Kamala Harris, and she had a significant number of people who voted for Trump and for her. So she asked on social media why. And, it's so easy if you're ultra political engaged people, like, losers like me, to forget that people mostly don't think in terms of left or right. They don't spend much time thinking about politics at all, in a formal sense, if we're honest. And they think about issues, and they think about their anger at the system, and they felt, their anger at their conditions and the way the world seemed to be going to hell. And they felt Trump was the angry person who showed that anger, and they didn't see that with Kamala Harris. They basically saw her saying, well, things are actually, we did okay, things are fine, and they don't need massive change, but, we'll defend abortion rights, which is obviously very important, and democracy, but that seemed quite abstract in terms of the everyday struggles that a lot of working class people would have felt. Obviously, we're talking about not to push aside the struggle for bodily autonomy, which for women crosses class and all the rest of it. But in terms of bread and butter issues, she didn't seem to have an answer to that, and he seemed to be the angry person who was voicing that anger.
I mean, do have a look at that. I mean, I thought it was really interesting, like AOC put up the responses she got, and it was like, you're against the system and he's against the system, and you're authentic and say what you think, and he's authentic and says what he thinks. And it was just so interesting that came up, and certainly was part of my experience.
Because she didn't seem, there was no authentic, you couldn't tell what she believed. And people said it was a bit harsh, kind of overly Xanaxed. No, she just seemed kind of a completely divorced, there was no emotion or anger, that you couldn't trust what her beliefs were.
People said there was too many celebrities.
Oh
they
yeah,
just felt
didn't like that.
It was, well, these people don't live our lives, so why do you keep getting them to tell us to vote for you? No, I guess in terms of the similarities though, can you, I mean, I lived in the US for a little while, and it's a very different, I mean, living in New York is a completely different thing, but I did see some similarities, but it's almost like an extreme version. But it does worry me, the kind of Trump-Farage overlap.
Yeah, I went to Austria a few weeks ago where the Freedom Party just came top. And the Freedom Party now, they were founded by Nazis, and they're more radical and extreme than they've ever been. They came top. And what worried me there is, I spoke to people mobilising against them, and they didn't really have a strategy, if I'm honest. It wasn't there. And you can see in Germany, the AfD, the far-right party there as well. The far-right, we can see in Hungary, Viktor Orban, the most openly anti-Semitic regime, by the way, in Europe, which has at the same time invited Benjamin Netanyahu to come visit to defy the International Criminal Court's issuing of arrest warrants for war crimes and crimes against humanity. But you know, that is a regime which it keeps the trappings of democracy, but it hollowed out all of their meaning. It just rigged and gamed the system. So it's a dictatorship in practice. And that is what the far right in Europe look to. And I worry at the moment, you can see that far right trend, which is in every country has its own expression. But the danger is that far right authoritarianism is a menace to even the flawed form of democracy that we have. And there's that general sense all across the West of decline and crisis and stagnation. And the far right offer very simplistic solutions that cut through. And a lot of the old social democratic parties no longer seem rooted in the communities they were set up to represent or to offer answers to people's struggles. So then when people see their living standards being squeezed or public services falling, then to simply say, well, there's too many foreigners, and if we got rid of those foreigners, then things would be okay, in the absence of a compelling alternative, that is cutting through. There's no question about it.
Yeah, I do want to say as well, because this comes up a lot in my family. My cousin came around today and she was saying as well about, we should be looking to move abroad, especially after the riots in the summer. And I think it was brilliant that so many people came out in Walthamstow. But that's really not, I feel like it's like that was the end of it or something. Mm-hmm. There's so much work that needs 100%. To be done. And yeah, part of it is about recognising the economic despair in parts of this country. And it is that we don't currently, or we have very few kind of formal political voices that actually take on the far right. And this is how, I don't speak for the whole Muslim community, but so many people that I know that felt like they couldn't leave their house in that week were like, no one's got our back. Like Zara Sultana, like no one's got our back. And so we should think about if we have a future in this country. I should say Saida Vasi is going to come and speak here in May or June. And she writes about that in her book. And it's a real thing, and it's a real concern.
Yeah, because, the two things that is, firstly, and you can see in Austria and elsewhere the point was made, is what the mainstream parties would do is they'd see the rise of the far right and think the way to diffuse that is to adopt their rhetoric and their policies. But all that did is shift the conversation exactly onto the terrain the far right wanted in the first place, instead of making the conversation about, economic issues that actually affect people in their everyday lives, which would then force the far right on the back foot because they don't have answers to that. So it just became a kind of argument about who can bash immigrants the most, and the far right, you can never outbid the far right. They'll always be more authentic and believable, and always will come up with more extreme policies, and that's what happened there. And I think the other point is about the mainstreaming of Islamophobia, which is a media and political elites here and elsewhere which whip it up, normalise it. We can see that in the Labour Party. We can see, look, one of the justifications for kicking Faiza out is because she spoke out about Islamophobia. It's just so outrageous. Kicking out a Muslim woman, in part because she spoke out about anti-Muslim prejudice, is deranged, evil behaviour, if we're honest, by the sadistic weirdos who run the Labour Party. Dead behind the eyes, careering weirdos. That's what's just great. It's just that annoys me about them. They're not even any good. They're not even any good. New Labour, whatever I think about them, substantial people. Might not like them, might think they should be in The Hague, but they were substantial people. They were talented at what they did. These people, they've got like the charm of Gareth Keenan, right? With the kind of, from The Office, and people say, anyway, but they've just got this, they're one-dimensional. All they care about is taking on the left. That's what makes their heart beat a bit faster. They don't care about anything else really. But they are so, with Islamophobia, we can see how that's mainstream in the Labour Party. And when there were anti-Muslim riots on the streets of this country, an attempted pogrom, Keir Starmer should have been out there saying, we stand by our Muslim sisters and brothers, we will take on... And he didn't do that, because he's crap.
Well, people are very nervous about it.
So...
I'm afraid of you. I actually just come to a point where I just laugh about what happened. I've forgotten how, I just sort of don't even know what to say anymore about what happened. But no, I'm going to ask this last question and then I want to open it up, and I know it's a question that many people have, which is obviously, you know, okay, where do we go now? Many people ask, oh, we need a new political party on the left. I have some thoughts about that, but I'm interested in what you think. There is, well, we can't do nothing. I think that's the thing, you know, people go, I'm like surprised you keep going, Faiza. I'm like, well, what are we meant to do? Like, we have to keep going. The stakes are so high, and like, you know, many people feel that no one's got our back, so we've got to, you know, keep finding a way through and show people that there are places that you belong, there are places in which your views are not just supported, but welcomed, and this is, you know, we have to start that somewhere, and you know, I do it at home, so it makes it easier for me, but you know, what do we do now? And because I know lots of people ask this, do we need a new political party?
Well, I think it's because I quit the Labour Party back in March. My mental health immediately improved, my mental well-being. I joined that.
Mine too.
Do you know what I mean? So I don't need to care about this anymore. I don't need to fewer grey hairs. Do you know what I mean? Anyway, I joined the Labour Party when I was 15, and then finally quit when I was older than that. A quarter of a century nearly in the Labour Party. Anyway. But when I quit at the time, I did, you know, my view was I didn't join any party. It was either on a case-by-case basis, back to the Greens where they're standing, or independent candidates, or the likes of, for example, Zara Sultana. And at the time, I was like, or brilliant candidates like Faiza, and then they kicked her out. And at the time, one of the reasons I did that at the time, because it was very clear to me, it was put to me that they were going to purge people and in advance. And they were going to do more than they did, by the way, but they were stopped because Rishi Sunak called the election earlier than expected, and they got more pushback than they expected over both Dan Abbott and Faiza. But there's enough evidence to suggest they were just going to keep going, and they were going to kick out. They were going to maybe do a mass purge, and those people in the Labour Party, needs to be clear, a lot of them are dead people walking career-wise. They've already suspended 7 people who rebelled over driving children into poverty. Real sadistic people running the Labour Party. Anyway, but you know, is Zara Sultana really going to be like that back in the Labour Party? I don't think so, if I'm honest. And you can see from her tweets, I don't think she thinks so either, given how she's talking about Keir Starmer and his complicity in genocide. So I do think, firstly, the Greens in certain seats are they're clearly, not they've got dibs on them, but I mean, you know, in certain seats, the Greens did very well. Like in Islington South, Islington South and Hackney South, they came second, a very strong, from basically 3-4% last time. And they did in Bristol Central, they came a strong second last time, and then this time they won. And they're actually now second behind Labour in about 40 seats. And they were only last time about 2 seats. So they're in a strong position now because they can do a squeeze Labour message, as either us or the Labour Party. Now, I'm not a Green Party person because my politics are rooted in class. And it was I voted for the Greens in my constituency, great candidate. Islington South did very well. They didn't campaign in those seats. That's the other point. They didn't even campaign there. They won their votes by default. In the next election, they could win all of Bristol. They could win all of Hackney, depending what I doubt Diane will stand next time. They could Islington South, they could win against Emily Thornberry, who used to got on very well, and then she ruined it by going on television to justify war crimes, so that was the end of that one. But then other places across the country as well, they came second. So I think if there was any new political formation, it would have to have an accommodation with that fact. But then there were other independent candidates, like Liane Mohammed, a British Palestinian who stood a nearly unseated West Streeting, 500 votes. Which would have been the best thing that had ever happened. So that was a real low point, just to see Wes Streeting's face. But she's actually submitted about electoral irregularities, so we'll see about that. But again, I mean, he had no idea that was coming. And I think there's other independent candidates, like, for example, Pfizer's clearly not joined the Green Party, and we need Pfizer in Parliament. And I do think leaders, just in terms of Pfizer, I know we often say we're bottom up and grassroots and collective struggle, and of course that's true. You do need leaders. Otherwise you get, a lot of popular kind of demand for things, but with not very much direction. And I do think people like Faiza are very important, and I do think Faiza, we do need, no pressure, I know you've gone through a lot, but we do need you actually a huge amount, and I do think you have to be part of it. But I think if there is a new party, it has to come out organically out of struggles. You can't just, I think, impose it in the way that I think some people would like to. But as things stand, I would say certainly to back independents and Green candidates on a case-by-case basis, with the view of getting a hung parliament with Labour as the biggest party, and then a deal in which, in exchange for support, they would have to change the electoral system, so then we don't have to have these stupid conversations all the time. That's how I see it myself, because I don't think, where's a new party going to come from as things stand? And I just think having independents where they build up their local bases, and you have Greens, which are clearly very well placed, and there's some great Greens. There's some Greens I don't probably agree with, who are a bit more Lib Deming, if I'm honest. But there are others who are good, genuine socialists, and the Green left is growing, and I know lots of people are joined to strengthen the Green left, and I think Zach Polanski, the deputy leader, he's gone on a real journey. I really like him. So I think that's where I see things at the moment. What do you think? I'm interested in what you think about this, though.
Yeah, I broadly agree. I think that creating a party in this moment, and so many things, like it could just die, and I think we have to be really careful about that. But personally, I just think that we should be organising much more in our communities. We should be just finding those leaders and making sure that they get the support they need. But honestly, it's just very, very hard to be on the left, and we've got to protect those people. It becomes hard to find work, quite honestly.
I know.
So, I'm lucky to have such supportive colleagues at LSE, but we really do need to support people in various ways, and I just don't want a rerun of everything that's happened if we create a party that's,
Which is because of battleground. I mean, it's just that way you get
we've
that.
got time as well, so I think we should be careful about how we move forward. But I think I read Diane Abbott's book, which you should read, and I think her conclusion, and you can tell she comes to it really reluctantly, is yes, we need to look at proportional representation, but also that there's no space left for the left at all in the Labour Party now. There just isn't, and it was so hard. There's so many stories I have. Like, you saw the end point, that there was years of toxic bullying, even when I was heavily pregnant, and they don't want us. And even, to be arrogant, my previous job, I was working with governments around the world. Prime Minister Sanchez launched my last report, Jacinda Ardern launched my last report, but I was seen as a low caliber candidate, because I believe in public ownership of water and I support Palestine. So
Not some landlord.
I've only got my house, so don't own any property. No, so this is the thing, that, here, for those here, please, if you're not already signed up, get involved. We've got to be taking on Redbridge Council, right? We've got to be taking on Just Atwell. We absolutely need to be standing up for this community and standing up for our politics. I know we spent too much time, I'm talking, and I know that you guys will have lots of questions. Just a reminder, there's water and tea over there if anyone wants to. Let's just take 5 minutes, say hello to each other, get some, and come back, and we'll run. We've got this room till 9:30 anyway, so let's do a good half an hour questions from 1:45. Is that okay? But be ready with questions, not comments, because I know lots of people have questions, and think about how you can put it in the most succinct way possible. All right, let's get started. I'm going to take 3 questions at a time. As I said, please keep them short. Oh great, there's 3 in a row right there. You're not all family, are you? Because I feel like... Go on, tell us your name.
Yeah, my name's Meg.
Hi.
I just wanted to say I feel really sorry that you have been on the receiving end of this toxic behaviour and bullying. I think it's just outrageous, and I find it really hard to kind of get my head around the fact that you've just clicked on some likes, click likes, and we've got President-elect Trump, who's done all the things he's done, and you've pressed a button a few times, and you are treated like this. My brain can't quite comprehend that. And one of the things I think you did was you liked a sketch by Jon Stewart, which was about how we can't talk about Palestine and Israel without people going crazy. And so he said, let's talk about something easy, let's talk about Ukraine, which is, really dark humour. But sadly, it's the truth, right? It's really hard to talk about this topic. Why is that? Why is it so hard? And why can you not, as a woman, talk about the Islamophobia that you've received? When this is the Labour Party, they should be extremely understanding of what that means. And I'm also really concerned about female politicians globally, in this country, but globally. And why, I'm really concerned about your safety. And we need you, desperately. We need you to stand up for these issues really badly. I think about Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, what she's been threatened horrifically. And other people I talked to, Murray Black in Edinburgh, her mental health declined rapidly. And then as she went down, they then beat up on her, they doubled down on her. So this is insane, I just want to name it, because it's crazy. And also I want to ask you, what do you think about the attitude towards women politicians in America? Because there's something about Kamala Harris that didn't vibe with people, and why is that? And as a woman of colour.
Do 3 at a time again, Donna. You can go really around there. That's the only time that's going to happen.
Hi, my name's Joy. I have a question really about strategy for the left from here, because you spoke about hoping for a hung parliament, hoping to be able to make electoral changes, electoral reform. And to me, I agree with your assessment, Faiza, that I don't think there's a home for the left in the Labour Party anymore. And I think we need to come to terms with that. I do think that grassroots campaigning and building solidarity amongst ourselves is important, but I still think, this was a phenomenally unrepresentative election that we just had. And there's a moment there, because actually this is something that it is going to be a barrier, because nothing that we want to achieve. I think that there are people who agree with all of the things that we agree with in the country. I think you see that, and that there's a huge audience there for that. But how are we going to get through to make any actual change without electoral reform? And I think we need a strategy, and I'm not sure that just independence and voices is going to be enough for that. Yeah. I do also have sympathy for, is this the right moment for a political party? But is there space for a campaign, an overt campaign, that works along, that acknowledges alongside the Greens, that we are alongside the Greens, because the Greens have their views on electoral reform as well. To overtly build that campaign, and I'm thinking for the next election, because we can't just keep waiting. Because things are slightly better, because we have a Labour government than they were under the previous one. It's not enough. So what do you think of the idea of building a more overt campaign aimed at achieving that hung parliament, which is the only way we're going to be able to make that electoral reform change?
Yeah, thank you, Joy.
I'm Andrew. We've never met before, but my question is on similar lines.
Yeah.
I fear that the Labour vote will collapse in the next election, and we'll have a reform government. And it means waiting after 5 years of corrupt government, we might start to make progress. But I'm getting to the age where I can't wait that long. So my question is, should we not be campaigning now for some form of PR? Sir Keir is the ultimate atheist. He doesn't believe in anything. And while he's against it now, there's no reason to suppose he won't be in favour of it once he sees it. It's the only hope he has of retaining any seats at all.
Okay. Just to stay on the reform thing, reform is, I think it's 80 Labour seats where reform is second. And I think it's just 25 or something for Greens that are second. So actually they think they need to appeal more to the right because of that. But it also just means that there's a whole bunch of people that will be put off. And also they will never win over the far right. They just won't. You can see it. They just don't trust them. Look at the far right, see somewhere it's like a lefty. Quite something. And thank you for those comments. No, it's been a journey. I'm so lucky to have had so much support here. And honestly, the night of the election, when I saw the piles, almost 12,500 people still put a cross by my name, That's what I always just try and focus on, because otherwise I'd be a bit depressed, I think. But the problem was ideology, you know, and they just used any excuse to get me. The problem was that I was seen as someone that would not go along with the leadership's positions on various things, because internally I marked my card in various different ways, and they just knew that I would be a problem, and they're just not they weren't open to diversity of opinions on the left. So, you know, it was just anything. But yeah, it's I wouldn't wish what happened to me on anyone. It was, you know, that's how they do it. You know, they target people like me and put other people off. I absolutely agree that we need a strategy, and I'll let Owen speak to that as well. We cannot wait for an election. That should start soon, and we should actually think about what that looks like. If not a political party, then a set of values. You know, as brilliant as Owen is, we can't just expect a few voices in the media to do that work. Owen's been doing it for a long time, but you know, and there's so many people. This is what, you know, Chicken and Whipper Green is not like a socialist republic at all. It's never even been a Labour seat. And there's literally so many people here that come to events like this and supported me, even though I'm an open, you know, lefty socialist, and always said, I will never hear me throwing immigrants under the bus, you know, and been really honest about that from the start. There is a lot of people out there that need somewhere to put their politics and their energies, and are looking for a home. So yeah, I agree. I think I've just sort of struggled on how that gets started and what that looks like kind of nationally. But you started the We Deserve Better stuff, Owen, so just interested in where you think that goes.
I mean, well, just for a second, Faiza was a victim of her own success in that, just to be very blunt, what happened there was they thought that she would become a figurehead in Parliament because she clearly has leadership qualities. And they thought that she would be a really good spokesperson, and as disillusionment kicked in with a crap Labour government, that people would look for leadership and then she would be the go-to person for that, for a lot of people. I mean, that's just bluntly, I thought I thought they'd purge you at the time, but that's why I thought when that happened, could not be less surprised about what happened at all. And you're right, look, I mean, obviously, within the Labour Party, the way they treat so many women, particularly women of colour. I mean, you've seen the treatment of Diane Abbott. You know, the first black female politician elected. And the double standards applied when so many Starmer allies have done terrible, egregious things, including, I would know, anti-Semitism. So you've got Barry Shearman, a pro-Starmer MP, who, when two Jewish Tory businessmen didn't get peerages, said, has there been a run on shekels or something? I mean, it was just like not even subtle anti-Semitism. He apologised, that was the end of the matter. Steve Reid, Shadow Cabinet Minister, referred to a Jewish Tory donor as a puppet master, obvious anti-Semitic trope, apologised, that was the end of the matter. Their Rochdale candidate, who literally talked about not only October 7th being an inside job, but also went on to talk about attacks from the Jewish media. I mean, these are just ridiculous examples, but they were in with the faction, and you got instead, particularly women of colour, being attacked and hounded, including because they were speaking out about anti-Muslim prejudice, and the Labour Party is institutionally racist. We saw that. Their attitude towards Muslim voters is hideous. We saw in Batley and Spen, where they first briefed that Muslim voters were disillusioned because they were anti-Semitic, and then when Labour narrowly won that vote, they said we've won over a new coalition of former Conservative voters, and that means losing the Conservative Muslim vote over homophobia in Palestine. That's what they said at the time. Just awful things to say about voters they treat as voting fodder for the Labour Party. That's how they treat Muslim voters in this country. It's just an institutionally racist party, and clearly Keir Starmer doesn't care about Muslim voters or Muslim people in this country in any meaningful way. But women, we've seen how women, Zara Sultana and others, Absana Begum, I mean, a survivor of domestic abuse and violence, and the way she was treated by the Labour Party. I mean, it's just hideous. So I think that is a really important point about misogynoir, about the combination in terms of black dynamic, in terms of racism and misogyny, mixing in factionalism. That's what happened. It's a really top. And the Ford report, they commissioned a KC to deal with this, one of the most prominent black barristers in the country, who then talked about the hierarchy of racism within the Labour Party, and then they just disregarded the report entirely. And Keir Starmer commissioned the guy. And then everyone who talked about the Ford report, which Keir Starmer commissioned, every time that was raised, it was like, we're cranks for talking about it. It became like, oh, the cranks going on about the Ford report. Keir Starmer commissioned that guy. Anyway, it's just a toxic party, and I don't think, there's no question, their view is, last time we thought the left was crushed, and then they came back, we're not going to make the same mistake this time. That's what they've decided. And they're going to do everything they can to just nail it down. And all I'd say in terms of what people are talking about, what happens next in reform, they're like a dream come true for right-wing populism. Because, I mean, on one level, it's funny how incompetent and shambolic these people are, because they really thought they were the grown-ups back in the room. And they've had politics on easy mode for so long, because they smashed the left and the media were like, woo, yeah, we love that. And then the Tories collapsed entirely of their own making, through scandal and disaster affecting huge numbers of people, Liz Truss blowing up the economy with crazy policies. Like, they couldn't have got everything in their favour. And then they came into power, and a Labour advisor told me in the election, lots of people think that they have this plan that's hiding in a cupboard somewhere, in a drawer, and they said, they don't. And they don't. You can see that. They have no vision for the country. You can see with lots of different things how Keir Starmer hasn't got leadership qualities. Whatever you think about assisted dying, that was his legislation, and he's just thrown it out there, and now his cabinet ministers are all denouncing it. You can see it today with, he said, I'm going to introduce a new law to ban spiking. Spiking's already illegal under the law. The laws aren't enforced on it, which is the problem. But, I mean, you can see this, he doesn't have... Look, I'm not a fan of Rosie Duffield, but what she wrote in her resignation letter was correct about him not having politics. He doesn't have... Tony Blair had politics. He doesn't. He's outsourced it to this very unpleasant right-wing faction in the Labour Party who do all of that for him. And then, he just thought he'd be a great Prime Minister because he ran, the CPS. But you can see he doesn't have leadership qualities. He doesn't have direction of what he wants. He has no clear sense of the country he wants to build. And a fish rots from the head down. If you don't have clear vision for what you want to do, then everything just falls apart around you. And you can see that happening. And the problem is, because they're so serially deceitful, they keep making promises or pledges and then breaking them. They did it to Labour Party members, that's one thing, but then they did it to the electorate. And that breeds a sense of conspiracism, of these people are just in it for themselves and they can't be trusted. And right-wing populism can really jump on that and weaponise it in a way that goes in very ugly directions. So in terms of what we campaign for, you can't really campaign for a hung parliament because, unfortunately, our electoral system means it's quite unpredictable how the cookie crumbles. I mean, they got 32.7% of the vote, and they won a massive landslide. They won they won 2/3 of the seats on 1/3 of the vote.
It's historically the biggest gap.
Yeah.
So it's
the most unrepresentative election ever. No party's won a majority on that lower vote, let alone a landslide. It's never happened before. That also, because they were like, well, who cares? We won the election with a big landslide. But that was always going to be a massive... Because you got that, didn't they? They went, oh, well, we meant to do that, actually, because we're just about voter efficiency and putting the votes in the right places. As if they really were aiming for 32.7% of the vote, or 33.7%. But that leaves them fatally weakened from the outset, because there's no enthusiasm.
So what should we do, Owen? Sorry, I'm just going to push you because I know more people.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I think we need to organise on a community basis on issues at the moment that unite us. And I think some people should expend energy in the Green Party, and some people should expend it on independent candidates like Faiza at the moment, because we don't have another party.
Okay, I'm going to take 3 more questions. Just to say on that, the institutional racism in the Labour Party, I saw that so clearly, especially when the Palestine issue came up, and I was on a WhatsApp group with like 100 candidates that had been chosen around the country, and it was shocking, just the level of disregard for the lives of Palestinians. And really upsets me because I took a note of all their names and I see them in Parliament now. Just at the back. Sorry, oh, Helen, sorry. Make you walk away. Big steps.
Hi, and good evening. My name is Dr. Kevin Cordes. Looking at representatives for the progressive left in future, there seems to be complete silence on the D-notice issue. And reflecting back on that, how do you deal with people who represent various communities, such as David Lammy? What do you do with a problem called David Lammy? He claims to represent Afro-Caribbean people, and he had the audacity to stand next to a photograph of Bernie Grant at the Bernie Grant Centre in Tottenham on the anniversary of his death, talking about racism when we all know what he's turned into.
Well, that's, I mean, I think that's a question for a lot of seats where there's a huge Labour majority. Okay, is it? Yeah, sorry, no, this young person here. Oh, actually, go to this one and then move down. Yeah. Deborah's daughter, sorry.
Deborah's daughter.
Hi, my name's Matilda. So, as one of the, I'm assuming, younger people in the room, I've heard a lot of criticism of Western media. I've seen a lot of issues with Western media. Where do you suggest we look for news? Where do you look for your news?
Yeah.
And as much as you can follow big left voices or people who you know and trust are speaking the truth, not everyone comes in knowing who these people are. Where do you suggest we look?
Yeah, there's a lot of misinformation out there as well. It's a really good question. Yeah.
Cheers, hi. I really appreciate what you're saying about organising locally and that sort of thing, but how do you square that with the fact that parties like Reform do so well, even though they basically don't, compared to what we're talking about, they don't organise locally? Look at Trump in America. He wins the vote by going on YouTube and talking to blokes, not about politics, but just like random cultural points. How do you think about the fact that, BLM and all these really positive protests, they almost follow social media trends where it's really hyperactive and then it stops, and that's the kind of logic that, especially from my perspective, I'm 23, I've got mates, I invite them to come tonight, they're like, no, I'm tired, I've got work. It's this is why you should come to this tonight. So how do you think about counter-organising online and having an online presence? I know, Owen, you said before, you don't want things to be top-down, but why not? Why not have that continuing engaged presence that people at the right always seem to be able to do so much better than us?
I would say that actually, though, Reform does, to some extent, the far right does organise in some of those communities, and you look at some of the work of, say, Hope Not Hate, and you can see the evidence of it. And just to say BLM, I know, it's easy to think, well, what came out of that? But even Alexia, who's does loads with me and was incredible during the campaign, is a young person I met locally who go to BLM thing, and so you can find people and build from that. So I wouldn't dismiss it entirely, but I understand your point.
Well, just quickly on David Lammy, we just, as well on the left, we need to make sure that we as well have people who represent the communities that we're seeking to represent. And almost the way of combating the problem you're talking about is, we have often lots of people on the left who are great activists, people of colour, black, who often don't get the platform and the representation that they deserve. And sometimes, because the problem is, the danger is we can be up against people who will abuse, in terms of the Labour Party or the Tories or whoever. We saw that. The Tories had the most diverse government ever. And yet, they were obviously instituting the most extreme policies possible to attack migrants and refugees. And it was woohoo, we got Cyril Braverman in the cabinet as she implements far-right extremism. So, obviously that's extreme against the Tories, but a way of combating that, because the Tories have really tapped into a sense of Labour just treats minority communities as voting fodder, that we actually elevate people. And I just think on the left, we need to make sure we have voices, people rooted in their communities, so we can have someone in Tottenham, for example, who's rooted in that community to take on David Lammy.
Can I just say something?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, super quickly just on that. Think about what happened to Jonathan Ashworth. Huge majority. I remember he came down here in 2019 when he shadowed how one another duplicitous, gosh. And he was like really going on about how he's got a 20,000 majority to me. And what happened, right? So it can happen, but you absolutely need to find local people. And honestly, I think sometimes the left is too purist about things. And we have to find people doing the work on the ground that are already known, that understand that community. But part of the reason that we did so well here is because, yeah, I went to school here and people have known me for a long time. It does really matter, and that's the way to do it. Not to, and Leanne Mohammed, again, similar, right? She's of that community. She can speak to it in a way that, you know, embarrasses West Streeting, and that's what we have to look for.
Exactly. We need our local rooted representatives. Just on the media thing, because they kind of come together, don't they? Those are really good points by Matilda, and I forgot your name, but there's a really, really good point that... George, sorry, cheers, George. Which is, we need to be clear about, you know, what we're up against and what works. And it is absolutely true, we need to organise in our communities because partly we have a disadvantage in that Farage has a big megaphone handed to him by a large chunk of the media. I mean, that is just an advantage, which has always helped him because he was basically made partly by the BBC. I mean, he was turned into a big celebrity, but he's also very charismatic and he does talk to people and cut through, because people, especially when you get these robot politicians who just seem like they've been grown in a jar and just speak in a way that people don't speak. And he does do a kind of, you know, he has this folksy demeanour that is actually very effective. He's a very good operator. It's always important to be, you know, be aware of the strengths of your opponent. I mean, obviously he's a massive problem who stands for toxic politics, but he's very effective and we need people like that. And on social media, that is something we have to really, I think you're absolutely right, the left has desperately, urgently needs to get their act together on that. And we are seeing different, you know, media outlets which have been built in the US and elsewhere, like I'm working with Mediasan or Zetio. I mean, my YouTube channel is much bigger than my Guardian column, which they're not maybe entirely happy about. But I mean, you know, that is something we need to just, you know, TikTok, Instagram, that reaches huge numbers of people who maybe won't turn up to meetings like this. And the problem at the moment, you get this algorithm where people we know, you just see one thing, you click on it, rabbit hole time, constantly then bombarded with right-wing propaganda and all the rest of it. And the left has often not been, you know, we've got better, I think, but we need people who can, you know, who can make that content. And I really think that's something now I just want to throw everything out in terms of finding people who would be good on TikTok, on Instagram, on YouTube, who can cut through, getting kind of really effective people who know how the algorithm works on TikTok and all the rest of it. Because if we don't do that, I think we are missing a massive pool of where people now engage with politics and become politicised. And that's definitely happening in the United States. Joe Rogan, no question, that really helps Donald Trump.
I think the thing that's really important about Joe Rogan, was thinking this when he was speaking, is that Joe Rogan doesn't just talk about politics.
No, he doesn't know.
You know, again, he's not here, hope he won't watch this, but yeah, a few years ago, I caught my husband watching Joe Rogan, and he was like, oh no, it's got this guy speaking about mushrooms. And I'm sorry, that's giving away a lot of things. But he's like, you know, and so Joe Rogan gets people to watch his show that don't necessarily agree with his politics or whatever, and watches, I mean, I should say at that time he was endorsing Bernie, but, you know, it's, so we need to kind of reach out to people and talk about different things, and so we need people that can talk about culture and not just politics, because not everyone wants to just listen to a podcast.
Yeah, we need, like, you're relatable, and I think that's what they hated that. I remember watching a Newsnight interview, you were just, when they just did you over, which you found about, I think you were out canvassing and you just got, like, found on Twitter or something. I mean, they really are just horrible.
But, I mean, saying that, you know, one of the things that really happened that day was that I genuinely don't remember saying this, and I watched it back and was like, oh my God, I can't believe I said that, is that obviously I was a new mum and I was breastfeeding, and it's, for those that know, it can be a bit of a struggle. And I had like horrible, painful, engorged breasts from breastfeeding, and I said it on Newsline.
But that's what I meant. That's what I was referring to. But it's like it makes you like you're relatable. You're not just like because these people are robots.
A lot of people, a lot of mums, women reached out to me and genuinely supported me because I spoke about those things. And I think we probably shouldn't be scared to be more human in the way that we practice.
Ash Sarkar is a really good example because she's funny, she's relatable. She's great. Anyway,
she's going to come as well. All right. Was there anything else?
No, that was it.
Okay. Let's take one last quick round. No, I'm going to try and. Okay. There's that guy there at the back, and then you've had your hand up for a long time.
Thanks a lot. Sorry, my name's Joe. My question was, I guess a lot of the focus of progressive politics since Thatcher really has been on the neoliberal consensus, on those kind of neoliberal reforms and the imperial projects that went along with it. And it feels like that consensus, at least rhetorically, is under attack, but it's under attack from the right and from within capitalism. There seems to almost be a power struggle between, I guess, that neoliberal consensus, which still has a grip over the Labour Party, still has a grip over the Democrats, but there is this other thing that is emerging, which is a kind of nativist right-wing populism supported by oligarchs. So it's almost like there's two fronts now, and I wonder how the left responds to that, and especially when we have figures like Elon Musk who seem very, very interested in British politics. I'm very worried about how that is going to show up, possibly in the next election, particularly when we talk about reform. So how do we respond to that change?
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, one thing I would say, I was talking to someone that was very much involved in organising the Muslim vote, and she was saying, what do we do at the next election if people are scared of reform and they feel like they have to vote Labour? Because, you know, as people say, it's a system where people feel like anything's better than the Conservatives or what have you. And, you know, what does that then do to the calculation? Let me just take two more questions.
Can I just say we didn't answer the question about where to get the news from?
Where?
Oh,
not just.
Oh, I try. Oh.
Okay. We'll come back to that. Sorry, Mr. I should say as well, everyone should follow Gary Stevenson. Who was it? Sorry, there was a hand. Okay. This next hand there, and then this one in front. Yes. Yes. Sorry.
Oh,
sorry.
I'm from Nottingham East. You know, we're Nadia Whittam is, yeah.
Sorry. Nadia Whittam, yeah.
Yeah. That girl says she probably noticed like in the current election. I noticed you were Nottingham East, and like a lot of people were like, you were not. Well, people like you were going to vote for Green or just stay at home because they were not enthusiastic about the current Labour Party is. Even though, what do you think of that?
Sorry, I'm not sure.
Yeah, there are a lot of people in Nottingham East. You noticed that there was a Guardian article about this. Article about this. Well, a lot of people were like you were going to vote for Green or just stay at home because they were not enthusiastic about the current Labour Party.
Okay.
So they vote Green or.
There was a low turnout in that seat. So we said right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. No. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Richard, I'm a university lecturer and union person.
Richard used to be my neighbour. Yeah.
Yeah, a few houses down.
Yeah.
Thank you first, I should say. Thank you, both of you, for everything that you've done and are continuing to do. And thank you also for some fantastic questions, particularly like George's. I'm going to follow up on it if I may. I just want to add to the very first question, really. Sanna Marin in Finland, she was the Prime Minister of Finland, and there's misogyny as well. I mean, she had the effrontery of being young and wearing a leather jacket.
Oh yeah.
She went out dancing.
Went out dancing on the day off. Yeah. So it's much deeper and it's much more structural. I'm not downplaying everything that happened to you. I'm just saying that it's much broader and much more structural.
No, I agree with that.
My question really is following on from the We Deserve Better and also the Black Lives Matter. My particular one is enough is enough. We were, as a unionist, we were all marched up the hill. I was there at King's Cross with a massive demo,
And then the unions, I suspect CWU, pulled the plug on it, and that was it, end of it. And so what role is there for the unions? Because I fear that we also suffer from the same structural limitations. So we're just not green, you know, so we're all about jobs, and we're not about green stuff. We're not international enough, so my union said, oh no, you can't take action around Gaza. Yeah, that's not a jobs issue. They got legal advice to stop us doing that. They're almost, they fail to address racism. I won't go into detail because there's a current case.
We're running out of time.
Yeah, sure. But basically, we're riven with factionalism as well. So all of these things stop us from doing anything. It's the same problem.
And I think also with the trade unions, a lot of them are now going to be quite quiet because they want to, you know, they basically see an opportunity in influencing the Labour government. Do you want to answer? I know we forgot. Okay, there's specific people that you think. I know we spoke about finding people on TikTok, etc. That you think we should be following. We didn't quite answer the question about Harris.
Oh yeah.
And kind of misogyny and racism, and then fighting on two fronts, low turnout as well. Yeah, and then trade unions.
You're on Harris, sorry, yeah, because I ended up focusing on the experiences of Faiza and others in the Labour Party. I mean, obviously, there's no question Kamala Harris faced misogyny and racism. There's just obviously no question about that. I guess the worry is that ends up becoming the explanation, a kind of fatalistic explanation of why she lost. Because, I mean, if I'm honest, there are far more conservative societies in the US which have elected female leaders. I mean, Pakistan and Bangladesh have had female leaders. You know, there have been female leaders in countries which are more typically conservative and patriarchal. I mean, obviously America's a deeply misogynistic society, and she came under severe attack. The reason I sometimes get cautious because I remember what happened to Bernie Sanders. They talk about the Bernie bros and portray them as their misogynists, and the Jewish identity of Bernie Sanders was actually completely erased from that. He was always portrayed as this cranky old white guy with brocialist followers. But Kamala Harris faced definitely. I mean, Donald Trump's a racist and he's a misogynist. And my worry is the Democrats left often women of colour on the left out to dry when he attacked them, and Trumpists attacked them, like AOC, for example, like Ilhan Omar, you know, Rashid Tlaib, the Palestinian American congressperson. So my worry is the Democrats pick and choose that, and they don't stand by women of colour who are not in their faction in the way they should. But that's not to say, of course, we don't defend Kamala Harris like we should defend any politician who comes into racist and misogynistic attacks, and she did. There's no question. It's really important. Neoliberal consensus collapsing. Yes, you're right. The right have their own alternative, their own narrative now. Because before it was open, like globalization and all the rest of it, Donald Trump doesn't stand for that. He's a backlash against that from the right, and you can see that in Hungary. They call it an illiberal democracy, illiberal, where you basically hollow out the meaning, as I said. And that's why we need an alternative, because no one wants neoliberalism. No one's bought into it, and people don't like the consequences. And that we either have our story or they have their story, and they tell an emotional story that actually gets people on an emotional level. And sometimes I think we fall into the trap of speaking like robots about the injustices that exist rather than how they affect people's actual well-being and lives and sense of respect. Because that's what right-wing populism taps into, people's sense of self-esteem and respect being trashed. And that can be toxic masculinity to a degree as well, so we don't want to go down that direction, but we do need to take that seriously. News sites, well, I mean, it's interesting because, I mean, I mentioned Zetio, and there's Drop Site News, which has been set up by Ryan Grimm and Jeremy Scarver off the back of The Intercept, which focus on Gaza and Palestine. Because you're right, well, they don't just do that, they do US politics as well, but at the moment, the focus of lots of progressive outlets, understandably, is on the genocide being committed by the West, in essence. But those are being built up, and I think they do investigative reporting, and we need more of that, because we've got Navarra here, and they do a great job. I think we need more resources thrown at investigative reporting and so on. But I would check out those websites, but that's what we need to build up. Yeah, you're right, lack of turnout in the last election. It was the lowest turnout in terms of adult turnout ever. 52% of all adults voted in the last election. It's kind of catastrophic, really. And you mentioned about Finland and misogyny there again, and you're right, again, female politicians everywhere. It's just in Britain, it's weaponized, it mixes with factionalism, and you get that toxic combination. Yeah, you're right, I mentioned enough is enough, that was a real tragedy. And the problem was, again, that was very top down, and you can see the limits of that, because then the top just pulls the plug and that's the end of it. And it didn't really build up anything. I mean, We Deserve Better, to be clear, was just a means of raising money for candidates. And that's what, it still exists, and it'll go into action again to raise money for Green candidates or independent candidates as and when, including in local elections. And I think that's what it'll do in the local elections. But I just finally, because I think we've got to wrap up. And did we answer all of them? I think we did. But just to wrap up, I mean, I do think we have to remember our strengths. We do have to remember our strengths on the big issues, whether it be public ownership, whether it be redistributing, wealth and power through taxing those who are booming like never before, whether it be, not penalising young people for daring to dream to an education all of society benefits from, workers' rights, taking on the housing emergency with the policies that we actually need, taking on the climate emergency, not supporting genocide and arming it. We're on the side of the majority. It's not like we're the fringe, We actually do have a consensus. People don't often, they lack confidence that in those policies being able to be enacted, but it's not like they don't like the policies or they're skeptical. They think these are good policies and they can see the system has failed. It doesn't deliver rising living standards. The longest rising living standards in modern history, since the Battle of Waterloo. They can see the housing crisis, they can see younger people not having a better lot in life than next generations. And the question isn't convincing people, that the system is broken and doesn't need an overhaul. It's making sure that we're in the good position to do that rather than the far right. And that is, I'm afraid, and we have to be really honest about this, the stakes are high. Because this isn't just about, do we end up with a crap Labour government or a crap Tory government? It is the prospect of a hard right extremist government which will rig the political system in very dangerous and scary ways, threatening the very future of democracy, which is what the prospect is in the United States now. If you were a betting person, would you bet on US democracy definitely 100% surviving as we understand it? Even despite the fact it's dominated by big money and all the problems it's got, I wouldn't bet on it. I wouldn't bet on that at all, and I wouldn't bet on that in lots of European countries either. You wouldn't have said that 10 years ago. I think we've got to have confidence in our strength. We can build in local communities. Even you see here, there's a big movement of people in this community, and they love Faiza because of who she is, but what she represents, that's what she tapped into. So we've got to build up those campaigns, be aware of our strength, know we're on the right side in terms of where the majority are, know this government is going to fall apart, whatever we say or do. So we've got to be in a position to do something about it. So let's have that confidence, let's have that strength. We do need leaders, and I do think Faiza is going to be one of the most important leaders that we have. So I think we need to do everything we can to build up and support her.
I was just thinking, we purposely booked this hall because it's called the Sylvia Pankhurst Hall, for those of you that don't know, she used to live around here. And I feel like she would be proud of this discussion. But this is really, we can't just have this discussion go and go, that was interesting. There's so much work that needs to be done. And, again, please, thank you for those of you that have come today and that have been coming. Please keep coming, try and bring people, try and get your friends to come. And, we do build and move forward. And absolutely, I remember when I did an event and I was like heartbroken, not long after we lost in 2019, and I was with Sebastian Hain, who was like this, oh God, this FT, I don't know if he's still at the FT, but he was like really like, oh, Boris Johnson is brilliant. And I said on the panel that, listen, Boris Johnson will absolutely not deliver a levelling up agenda. And they kind of were like, she's lefty, da, da, da. I can tell you, this thing about economic growth is so 2005, it's unbelievable. And we have to make sure that we're there to offer an alternative when, this, whatever you want to call it, ideology set of policies doesn't deliver in the years to come. And I also, just to heads up, and I'm telling you this because it's going to force me to keep going, is that I'm trying to write this book called Unrepresented that gets into some of this stuff. And yeah, I'm going to make notes and I steal some of your questions and mention them in that. So thank you, keep going. There's so much joy in this room, you know, talk about getting emotional, and I see so many people here, don't embarrass them. But you know, people that I've had so much fun with as well, and we have to remember that we should be confident in our ideas, but there can be love and joy and fun in our movement. So please join us on the 16th of December. I just had these ideas of a local DJ that I know that is on BBC that I'm going to ask to come and play some music as well, if we're allowed to do that. But yeah, please put it in the diaries, 16th. I'm going to get some samosas again, like I did last year. Because those were here. Owen, you genuinely are my hero. Thank you so much.
You're my hero. My hero.
I know that sounds too gushing, but you know, I just remember all those years ago and just like, no one's saying what I think, and then like Owen appeared.
And we got loads of them. We got loads of people.
Definitely, but we need more. And I just want to say as an opportunity to congratulate Owen, who got married to Victor, who's
hiding.
Yay.
He will hate that.
Everyone was very, very drunk, by the way, when I got to your party, like hilariously. But yeah, no, thank you, and thank you for continuing the fight and you know, putting so much energy into this. Okay, and people are going to go to the Cricketers pub, which is local. Does someone want to lead the way? Sorry, I'm sorry, I'm looking at you. One of these guys at the front, if you want to come to the pub. And I think that's it. Oh, one more last thing. There's a local protest on Palestine that's going to meet at Barclays in Walthamstow on Wednesday 27th at 5:30.
They're marching to Town Hall, so if you can't get there for 5:30, go to Walthamstow Town Hall.
Okay.
And it's to try and get the Waltham Forest Council to divest away from...
They've agreed to divest, but I think there's some...
Push it forward.
Yeah.
Dilly-dallying on definitions of what...
Yes, there's some issues of details. But yeah, thank you everyone. And I think we have to move out quite quickly. Right? We have to be out of here in like 5 minutes. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. I'm possibly.